Michael Gaspar is here in studio with us. I'm just getting my headphones detangled here. We're going to introduce Michael in just a minute. We're going to be starting today's show. Thanks for being with us, Michael.
Yeah, thanks for having me today.
Yeah, so we are live on Instagram and Facebook. Please do share. There are going to be great stories and great conversations for how we can continue to live the church's teaching, specifically on the issues of same-sex attraction, pornography, getting into the realm of confession, freedom, joy, virtue, so much here in today's show. So we are going to get started without further ado. First segment. Hello, everyone just joining us on the live feed. Michael Gaspar is here in studio with me. And you'll hear crickets for just a minute while they play the intro. Here we go. Okay.
You're listening to Trending with Timmery, offering an eternal perspective on today's hottest topics. National speaker Timmery Millington has been a passionate advocate for life as long as she can remember, helping Gen X through Z answer the call to true feminism and authentic manhood. Timmery holds a master's degree in biblical theology.
Hello, everyone. So good to be back with you. I have a full show, to say the least, today. This week on Trending, we're specifically spending 2 episodes talking about the topic of same-sex attraction, whether it's relating to and working with friends and family who experience same-sex attraction and kind of navigating our own feelings, our own perspectives, and our faith on the issue, but also coming from a place of compassion and hope, recognizing that we are all sinners and we're walking through a journey that requires patience and joy. So I hope you'll stay with us as my guest this week. We've been planning this for a few months now, and he's graciously taken the time to be with us. He's a marriage and family therapist with the Breakthrough Clinic in Los Angeles. His name is Michael Gasparo. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Timmery. Glad to be here. Yeah, I work as an associate marriage and family therapist and an associate professional clinical counselor at the Breakthrough Clinic with Dr. Joseph Nicolosi Jr. And we have clinics in Encino and Thousand Oaks as well.
Can you speak for just a minute about who Dr. Nicolosi is for those who don't know him? Because his work is incredibly impactful right now, dealing with sex addiction, trauma, and so forth. Can you share a little bit about him?
Sure. So I work for Dr. Joseph Nicolosi Jr. Some of your listeners might be more familiar with the work of his father, Dr. Joseph Nicolosi Sr., who was a real pioneer in the Catholic psychotherapy world. He took a lot of time and energy throughout the 90s to author books on the issues of same-sex attraction for people of faith or whose worldview or values didn't line up with the homosexual identity and gay identity. And he also was an advocate for self-determination, for the rights of individuals to choose to live according to that part of their conscience. His father appeared on every major media outlet you can possibly imagine, as well as has a storied history of YouTube videos now available, which can be seen around the world. So his son, after his father's passing about 2 years ago, really had been working with his father for quite a long time and took up the mantle of that work and took it into the 21st century with continued investigations and research on trauma, its impact on sexual addiction, or trauma and its impact on even sexual orientation development, as well as shame, attachment loss, and all of these fascinating complexities of the behavioral sciences in a way that we're understanding more and more as we research and learn the human psyche better.
The work of Dr. Nicolosi Jr. and yourself at the Breakthrough Clinic, I think, really runs side by side with so much of what we're seeing right now in the Me Too movement. We're seeing that sexual abuse is very common. We're seeing that the pornography addiction in our culture is creating a number of addictive behaviors, bonding issues. I mean, we could go on about the challenges, and we will in our next episode. So please be sure to catch both episodes with I almost elevated you to doctor today.
Maybe one day.
Michael Gasparo, as he will really be sharing today his testimony, and we'll be getting into the nitty-gritty of the behavioral sciences and really connections to same-sex attraction in the following episode. So Michael, you and I are both seeing what's going on in the culture with so many of the challenges, specifically with pornography, as mentioned. a lot of people don't like to open up the elephant in the room, but even especially young boys and their struggle with masturbation, and so many of them just not understanding the impact it can have long term. I mean, we're at the point today where we're seeing 20-year-olds struggling with erectile dysfunction connected to two of these issues. I want to kind of bring this full circle because you specifically got into marriage and family therapy because you yourself has been through a journey exposed to a lot of these issues. Can you share with us your journey and how you got involved and what kind of put it on your heart to be where you are today?
Sure. So I also want to just add one extra thing to what you said too, and to just further your argument. We're seeing also more and more young women deal with pornography issues as well, which I'm sure you're aware of.
Right.
But I have a good friend who I am a part of the Catholic and adult community with, who is passionate about speaking about that aspect of this challenge as well, because it was once seen as predominantly only a male issue, but have you heard more that it's becoming more and more prevalent for young women as well?
Absolutely. And I think that for some reason, we're not talking about it enough. We assume it's primarily among men. And I've talked about on the show before how even female masturbation is taking place very commonly. And in fact, medical professionals are encouraging it, which is so shocking. I've heard medical professionals encouraging women with menstrual issues to masturbate to somehow ease some of their PMS symptoms at times. I mean, this is where the medical field is getting into this sexual exploration that has gone far too far and is creating many issues if we say, just a little here.
Sure, and I didn't mean to take us on too far of a tangent there, but I just thought I'd put that in the ring since we are focusing mostly on my story and men as well over the next week or two that we speak. So I'll jump into what you asked about, which is what put this on my heart and why am I here today? I will tell you that from an early age, I sensed that maybe I was feeling a little bit different or distant, I should say, from the men in my life, particularly from the boys around my age and going to middle school era. So around age 11 or 12, I started to notice a real emotional distance that felt extremely isolating to me. And as you can imagine, that's the time of puberty starting to occur. So I had this flood of hormones and a rush of sexual curiosity. And that was met with a sense of deep longing for closeness with men in my life. And those two things felt very combustible to me. And it was the perfect storm for seeking out pornography at an age where I was extremely influenced by these shocking images that in some ways were a bridge to me to the intimacy that I felt like I lacked.
Now, did you see that you weren't just seeking out pornography, but you had probably already been exposed, which made you aware of what it was?
I think there was an exposure of awareness through friends talking about pornography a lot in middle school. And so it triggered an interest in me by around, let's say, age 12 or 13, to where I was exposed to masturbation, and then through discussions at school to the reality of the accessibility of online pornography. And this was, of course, in the late 90s. I mean, I'm 32 now, so this was in around the year 2000 probably, when internet pornography was prominent, but nowhere near as prevalent as it is and is easily accessible as it is now even.
I'm so glad you brought that up because that's what I was going to say. Please listen to this. This was, 20 years ago that you're saying this exposure in middle school is taking place. This is why we see first exposure to porn is really about at the age of 8 years old now.
It's unbelievable.
For those who are just joining us, that is Michael Gaspar. He is a marriage and family therapist with the Breakthrough Clinic, and he's sharing with us his journey here on Trending.
Absolutely.
So where next? Where did this go? You're experiencing some what seems like might be isolation and possibly same-sex attraction. You're seeking out porn.
Mm-hmm. Well, I sought specifically homosexual pornography out at that age because I was particularly drawn to that idea that I could enact some sort of imaginary closeness with men through these images online, since I felt so distant in my personal life. And that attraction and that habit, I should say, really developed over the next year and a half or so until a powerful religious experience challenged me to surrender some of these patterns of behavior. Now, I will tell you, my history and struggle with pornography and masturbation didn't end there, but it did end for a while, which allowed me to see more clearly what had been going on in my life. And I was still really young. I mean, this is why I work with high schoolers now. We assume sometimes that 14-year-olds don't have adult problems. I was dealing with very real problems at an age when most people assume that a freshman in high school might just be dealing with trivial issues.
They like girls, and that's it.
Yeah.
That's not all that high schoolers unfortunately have to deal with anymore.
Absolutely. And that led me eventually to having an anxious and depressive episode by the end of my freshman year of high school. And luckily, because of my religious perspective and my relationship with Jesus Christ, I trusted a priest enough in confession to confide that I had been looking at homosexual pornography. And that priest was a wise and kind man who encouraged me to set up a meeting with my parents outside of confession to discuss this at a very young age, when, quite frankly, if he hadn't done that, I don't know if I would have ever told my parents throughout high school. Unfortunately, I was not feeling very close or safe with my father at that time. And this is nothing to blight his character, but it's the nature of our relationship at that time. And so I agreed to speak with my mom. So I said, even though I didn't really want to, I said, all right, you know what? That sounds like a better option than being miserable at home and lonely right now.
Right.
So I agreed to have that conversation, which really kicked off this path of God's grace moving in this area of my life.
What a blessing that this priest was aware enough and intuitive enough to say, let's invite other people. And I think this is the struggle with same-sex attraction. It's
Right.
so often, it's so isolating, as you already experienced, that kind of led you into the pornography, that he did exactly what was necessary, of bringing the necessary people into your life, surrounding you, giving you the support to start a journey of healing from what you had experienced,
Absolutely.
both on a physical level, but also on the level of the soul as well.
Absolutely. Planting a seed too,
Yeah.
a seed of hope for the future.
What were some key things that began to help you in kind of your plan that you guys implemented from here?
Okay, so first of all, I began to seek therapy. And I was told that therapy could be an opportunity to explore what maybe contributed to why I had these feelings, and they might resolve. Of course, that was enticing to me at that age, but quite frankly, I was dealing with a host of mental health issues, namely anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder, some depressive tendencies. So a lot of people, when they talk about same-sex attraction and the struggles associated with it, they only talk about bullying, they only talk about social issues at the school level. There was plenty going on in my life that was not centered around same-sex attraction, but that is common for people who deal with same-sex attraction. So sometimes we overly conflate one issue with every other issue in that person's life. So what helped is getting to see a therapist who helped me to see a lot of other areas of my life that needed to be addressed beyond just what my sexual proclivities were at that time.
And this is, I think, truly a Catholic-centered approach to therapy overall. We see the whole person. We don't just say, oh, let's point right there. That's a habit of a sin that you are struggling with. No, a good doctor looks at everything that's going on. The diet, past medication, family health issues, environment of how the person's living. I mean, this is truly, I think, an integrated perspective on the whole person to view this is where you're struggling, and we want to enter into that with you and see where we can help you in healing, right?
Sure, yeah.
From what you know, whether it was loneliness, anxiety, depression, feeling excluded from a certain environment. So we're going to come back with Michael Gaspar. He's a marriage and family therapist with the Breakthrough Clinic, and in fact, he's sharing his passion for why he has gotten into the work of helping people through trauma, sex addiction, and much more. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie. Please go check out the Breakthrough Clinic while we are away. We'll be right back. Okay, let's come in. Just 1 second here. Okay, and we are good to go. Hello, everyone. So good to be with you. I have in studio with me my dear friend here, Michael Gaspar. He's a marriage and family therapist. We are diving deeply into the issues of pornography, same-sex attraction, and so much more. But before we get to that, I just heard some news for our dear friend, Chris Mueller, who had been my guest for quite a long time here on Trending, who recently has shared that one of his younger children, a little boy, is experiencing some really serious health issues right now. So I'm asking you guys, please, these are some really scary and unknown waters for he and his wife and their family. So please do keep Chris Mueller and his family in your prayers as they look for answers and a journey of healing for their son. As I mentioned before, in studio with me is Michael Gasparo. He is of the Breakthrough Clinic, and he's sharing with us his journey and having really started to go through therapy after coming to a priest sharing about looking at same-sex porn, essentially, and just the isolation you were experiencing. You started going through this healing journey, Michael, and in high school, would you say that you were able to start to really find your identity with God a little clearer? as a beloved son of God, and that was part of your healing process at the same time as going through therapy as well?
Yes, absolutely. And particularly, I revisited therapy when I had been away from a couple years of that process and that work as a senior in high school. And it's when I realized what I think a lot of teenagers realize: I'm going to graduate in a year, and then I have to actually face life and do life in a way that's authentic. I can't hide from this same-sex attraction issue. I won't be able to hide behind my age or other factors that people can write off and be like, oh, maybe he's just not interested in girls. And I did date women in high school, and I had some experiences with feelings towards women, but ultimately, like you said, my identity began to become more clear that it was not going to be rooted in these attractions alone, and I wanted to continue to pursue a path of healing that would help me understand them according to my faith. Because if Jesus's words were true in the church, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and the truth shall set you free. If that was true, and the church had the truth that same-sex attraction wasn't my identity and didn't define a path towards freedom, then I had to find a way to reconcile both these deep-seated feelings that I had and tendencies with my faith, and not just ignore it and bury my head in the sand.
This is what's so frustrating for me, even among people working in the church, when they refer to, same-sex attraction or that gay person, or they actually take up the language of gender identity and so forth, because the reality is it's an ideology. It's not an identity that defines a person. And this is what's so frustrating, because we're trying to say that struggle is what's identifying the person, because it might just be a struggle. It might even not necessarily even be sinful behavior, and there's a big distinction there in terms of what we're indulging in.
Right.
Yet I feel like sometimes people, I don't want to say criminalize, but like kind of just reduce and create this yuck factor that is just so atrocious to me. I think having grown up exposed to this is the reality of something that people are experiencing in our culture, and we can't kind of just ignore it, but we also can't go onto the other spectrum and just absolutely approve it, which we'll be getting to a little bit later as well.
Right.
So share with us your journey as it continues.
Okay, so when I was a senior in high school, like I mentioned, I decided to revisit therapy. And at that time, I was able to work with a therapist who deeply understood some of the complexity of this topic, of this issue in my life. And I began to unwind some of the fabric of the story that I had told myself for all these years, that I was always going to be this way. I was always going to have same-sex attraction. There was no hope for me to have a relationship with a woman. And here's where the complexity of behavioral sciences kind of meets some with the church right now. The church does not definitively say a person with same-sex attraction can or should change their attractions. They speak to the heart of what a spiritual matter is here, which is the virtue of chastity, which we're all called to, whether or not you're heterosexually inclined or if you're inclined towards homosexual behavior. And so what I started to realize is that the church had guided me towards the behavioral sciences because there were some answers there that they were okay with me pursuing, but not necessarily were incumbent upon me to force upon myself, right? So for me, it became a personal journey to say, I want to understand better what's fueling this fire. I don't just want to force and put away these feelings and repress them or hide them or deny them. I truly want to become friends with them, understand them, and see if they can resolve as a process unfolds. Through college, I would say I began a period of rebellion at times against God. It was that wrestling heart of mine that was like, God, I believe you. I know this is true, but can I just do it my way? Let me try my way for a little bit. And I'll tell you that most people that I know who are on this path of experiencing romantic or sexual same-sex attractions and are trying to live according to their faith, they experience what we call a non-linear journey in therapy. So that means that they go one direction overall. The trend is towards chastity, let's say, or integrating their sexuality according to their faith for many of them. But there are ups and downs along the way. There are certain times where we become the prodigal for a moment or longer than a moment. But if the truth is stirring in your heart like it was in mine, I could never fully abandon it for a path that I knew wasn't ultimately God's call for my life.
And that's such a powerful testimony to everyone listening who's ever struggled with sin. Isn't that the reality of it? And this is what's sometimes frustrating, is we forget that our journey, each of our journeys is so radically different, and we're trying to find that balance. I mean, I just look at young people today and the battle they're working through to live out chastity. Mm-hmm. Across the board, it is a very difficult virtue. I feel like unless you have the infused virtue of chastity and you are staying very close to the sacraments, it's a battle.
It is a challenge, and particularly not all types of struggles with chastity are the same. And this is what we're talking about a lot when we go into neurobiology with the theory of attachment, for instance, that's predominant in the secular psychological field, which isn't necessarily contrary to our understanding of development as Catholics either, particularly affect regulation. So when we talk about addictions now, you even hear priests a lot talking about emotional regulation. If somebody's compulsively drawn towards a disordered behavior, it's likely at times that there is an emotional affective issue happening. And if we're not attentive to that, it might appear as a temptation similar to someone else's temptation, but with a different level of pull to it. So what we tell our clients is we want to help you heal the wound that is fueling this temptation, not just get a good Band-Aid to slap on it or to try to force you not to feel a certain way. And I'll add one other quick thing. We as a church, in my opinion, can grow and get better about how we talk about this issue. Because if we frame it as just a matter of deprivation, stop doing that thing you really like that you want to do, that's not a great selling point. So I think we can get better at saying there is something greater than the thing you're seeking in the homosexual lifestyle. And it is freedom in Jesus Christ in your life, and there will be ups and downs, and I am a sinner, Timmery, and need of God's mercy. But there is more freedom on the path towards Jesus than on any other path that the world offers us.
And to get into this emotion, if I'm following you correctly, because I think this is really powerful. For example, there are so many studies showing, a husband who, let's say, is looking at pornography, and actually Dr. Nicolosi, I've seen him go through this exercise before, where he says, okay, you're looking at pornography. Put yourself as a spectator. The last time you looked at pornography, put yourself, I'm sure you do this all the time,
sure, yeah.
and walk through what, in that question you ask of put yourself, what do you see there?
Right, so we have our clients a lot of times have themselves look at themselves within the last time they enacted this behavior. So a man, let's say, looking at pornography, and we say, look into your own eyes. We use this as a window into self-awareness. What were you feeling? And a lot of times they'll start and they'll say, I was excited, I was entranced. Okay, but then we ask them, this trance state is common in sexual addiction. We say, what's beneath that? If you kept looking into your own eyes, what are you seeing underneath that? And often there's a longing, a craving of some kind for some possibly unmet need. And then when they take a little time, Timmery, to look a little deeper, to dive a little lower beneath the surface, there is often a deep unmet emotional need. If it's fear, sadness, hurt, we try to get them in touch with that feeling and use standard psychotherapy methods to try to address unresolved wounds that could be, in many cases for our clients, fueling the temptation towards that behavior.
For example, you're not addicted to pornography, but you're addicted to essentially the fantasy or the feeling that's being experienced. But often, for example, a man in that instance might say, oh, I remember reading a story. I got in a fight with my wife. I was really being essentially emasculated, right? Being put down. He was looking for two things. Maybe he was looking for marital intimacy. Maybe he was looking to be strong and to see that dominance.
Yeah, powerful.
Yes, and maybe that's the type of pornography, because I know to shock people, there are different types of pornography that can be sought out. Marital pornography, child pornography, same-sex attractive pornography.
Pornography involving BDSM, when people are essentially abusing one another in power structure roles that we see so often in 50 Shades of Grey. I'm sure you've talked about that on this.
I'm sure I've not
ad
seen
nauseam. Yeah. Well, I'm sure you've addressed that. It's a cultural issue. We see throughout culture, there's this disordered infatuation with power dynamics in an unhealthy way being lived out in sexuality. So yeah, the nature of the pornography itself can be a window into the wound.
Absolutely. So when you're talking about this, you were talking just a minute ago about freedom. You're talking how those things, those desires for, marital intimacy, the desire for a connection, to not be lonely. Some of these desires that people are entering into the pornography addiction for are actually, the desires are good, but they're being looked at for to kind of fill a hole that is missing in someone's life.
Sure, absolutely. Their desire can be good, but at the same time, the means of trying to achieve it are poisonous. It's sort of like if you're thirsty and you're like, I think I'll have 3 shots of tequila to quench my thirst. Yeah. It's not going to go well for you.
And this is what's so powerful, I think, about so much of the work that's being done in therapy. And this is why I think it's important also to have a Catholic therapist to recognize this integrated perspective of faith with behavioral sciences, that we're looking essentially for freedom. And at a time where people are so disconnected with their own emotions, this is so important.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. And I think that this conversation is one that churches can do a good job of continuing to have without abandoning in any way the deep-seated spirituality that runs through the Catholic tradition.
Coming up, we're going to be talking specifically, and I know you are struggling with this if you're listening, because I think everyone's trying to find that balance between approving same-sex attraction and absolutely rejecting the person that you know who's experiencing same-sex attraction. It's a hard balance, and there's compassion that we want to have, but there's also a lot of fear, anxiety, and real relationships that we have to navigate. So coming back, I will have Michael Gaspar, who's a marriage and family therapist, and we'll be getting into the challenges of family relationships and friend dynamics. We'll be right back on Trending. I'm getting a lot of crispies in my head.
I just had that too.
Yeah.
Like little noises?
Yeah, little, I don't know what to call them, crispy zaps. Whoever's listening to what? It's like when you're describing what kind of noise your car is making.
It could be because the pot that has the audio for your jingles, I have to leave that up because I can't reach it.
I've never had it before.
Oh.
This is like a static.
Yeah, there we go. See, compare my words to describing it to your static. That would be so much better. Crispy. It's gone.
It's in mine, but
yeah, I hear a little bit too. But
my phone.
I was actually going to ask, maybe hold it, because it did kind of.
Maybe it is. Move my phone over here.
It might have something to do with
I pulled up the Catechism to try to quote one line about homosexuality.
Don't worry. If it
I'll
does
keep
that
it
a
over
little
here.
bit. If that does a little
it doesn't
bit.
show up on the files.
It doesn't?
No.
Okay, so you're not
It
hearing
must be I think it's the phone.
Okay.
So I'm just going to quote the Catechism on one line.
Okay, it sounds like there's a point you wanted to hit before we transition?
No,
or
but it was
right?
about what you brought up about accepting the person versus approving of homosexuality.
Okay, awesome. And I want to bring in this quote I just absolutely loved from Father Carter Griffin.
Okay.
Okay, we are good to go.
Sorry.
I have in studio with me Michael Gaspar, who's a marriage and family therapist. He shared his story with us, which brought him so passionately into the marriage and family movement of therapy. He is doing incredible work, also serving our church in Catholic education as well. And I think that your story is a testament to no matter what we struggle with, whatever Catholic teaching, whatever sin we might be battling, there is so much wisdom in what the church is teaching. And Michael, there's this quote, and I want to hear your thoughts on this.
Sure.
So you may have heard out in Washington, there's a Catholic prep school, high school prep school, that they've decided to start publishing quote unquote marriage announcements for people who are in same-sex relationships.
I saw this.
And National Catholic Register put out an article by Father Carter Griffin, and I love this line where he's talking about how we can't just acquiesce to the popular belief of the time. We have to stand with what the church is teaching. And he says it is far more comfortable to acquiesce in the wisdom of the age than to courageously rebel against it. And isn't this a testament to our own lives and our own sin?
I would say it definitely resonates with me in my life and my sin, but I think this starts with humility on the behalf of believers, because we will be a more powerful witness, I think, when we are humble like Jesus calls us to be. If we stand in judgment of others and courageously judge, that's going to do far less good than if we courageously stand for truth while humbly admitting the need for mercy in our own lives.
Yeah, and courageously rebelling doesn't mean rejecting people. It means rejecting ideologies.
Absolutely. And throughout the ages, the church has dealt with certain heresy that courageous people have stood up for, which is why we have the truth of the church passed down through the wisdom of the ages without blemish.
Michael, let's talk about this balance. And I see so many people struggling with it. People of good faith who I thought wouldn't be struggling. The balance between, okay, we have a friend, a family member, or maybe this character we love on TV, who we also follow their journey. They might be struggling with same-sex attraction, whatever it might be. And we do one of two things. For the most part, it's a spectrum of either absolutely rejecting and condemning that person, and then on the other end, it's just approving anything they do. Well, love is love, and that's the attitude. How do we find this balance?
Well, one thing that I did when I've been talking with some of my clients, and I have clients who have children who have same-sex attraction and they're faithful Catholics and they're struggling with, how do I even interact with my child? How do I treat them? How do I engage in a way that doesn't approve of what they're doing? I want to encourage everyone, bust out your catechism when you get a chance.
Amen.
Homosexuality is addressed in the catechism. There's not a lot on it directly, but there are a couple paragraphs. And what I found the most fascinating about this is that the catechism delineates between, it differentiates, I should say, between acceptance and approval. So the second half of when the homosexual person is addressed in the Catechism, it says specifically that they must be accepted with respect, compassion, and sensitivity. Every sign of unjust discrimination in their regard should be avoided. So they, just the paragraph prior to this in the Catechism, have made very clear that they should, under no circumstance can homosexual behaviors or inclinations be approved. So the Catechism distinguishes between approval and acceptance of the person. And let us take time in our lives, if you have someone you love that deals with homosexual tendencies or romantic same-sex attractions or whatever you want to call it, to pray and ask the Holy Spirit. My encouragement to people is to ask the Holy Spirit to guide your heart and mind about how to live out the call to accept the person with respect, compassion, and sensitivity.
I love that, Michael, because this is a fine line. And even when I speak at some conferences, people get frustrated with me, but I think it's a really important distinction. There's a difference between, let's say, going to a quote-unquote marriage celebration of two people who are same-sex attracted.
Sure.
There's a difference between going to that, which shows in a sense a sign of approval, and let's say having your friend or sister, whoever it might be, come to your house with their partner,
Sure.
right, and have dinner.
Yeah.
There's a difference between loving the person, seeing the person, absolutely unwaveringly loving them, and approving an action.
I agree completely. I mean, Jesus dined with prostitutes and tax collectors.
Thank you.
So, I mean, if we can't follow the model of Jesus, I don't know what we're doing here. And
Yes.
so having a relationship with people, I have a relationship with many people who identify as part of the LGBT community,
Right.
and I regularly spend time with them. So if one more person tells me if I just knew a gay person, I would change my view, I don't know what I'll do. I think I'll pull my hair out maybe, because I have a lot of close friends and family that identify as part of this community.
Yes.
I don't write them out of my life. I love them. I do my best to love unconditionally, but I fall short of that many times.
Right.
But that doesn't mean, like you said, I acquiesce to the wisdom of the age, as you quoted from the father from the Xavier Prep School.
And I have to say, it's been infuriating for me for many years now to see this, because I too have grown up with family members who are same-sex attracted, with friends who are same-sex attracted. I grew up in the dancing world, and I don't remember ever once, whether it was my family dynamic that I grew up around or the people that I interacted with who probably disagreed with such behavior, who ever treated them differently. And so
That's good to hear.
for us, well, in my immediate sphere,
Sure.
I remember, one of my friends was bullied for supposedly people believing that he was same-sex attracted. I remember he was trash canned all the time in high school. And I would get so angry. I remember, growing up in a small town, people would kind of be snarky with him and say stuff. And I would, as a young teenager, would get annoyed with these people. And, these were strangers that would be interacting this way. But this isn't something I saw modeled in my family, yet the Catholic, I think, identity a lot of the time, unfortunately,
is blamed for this.
Condemn or approve
Yeah.
people with same-sex attraction. And that's not what the church teaches.
Well, and let's, not negate your friend was bullied, right? And so
Yes.
a lot of people who deal with same-sex attraction are bullied. I was bullied very terribly in middle school, and particularly because some people assumed I had this struggle. So I know the pain of that experience, and yet it wasn't the teachings of my faith that were furthering my distress. They were actually the things that were leading me towards less distress. So often we hear that there is this conflation of, oh, you believe in God and Christianity and a version of Christianity that rejects homosexuality as ordered, therefore that's contributing to your distress. False. Not true. Not true for me and not true for a lot of people I know. If that's true for someone else, okay, then we can have a discussion about how your church implemented the teachings of the faith. Fine. However, I was bullied by people at school, not in the name of God, but in the name of vicious, wounded teenagers. So when the church still taught me what I know to be true about sexuality, that was actually a path towards healing for me, not an added distress to my life. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, it makes me think, too, about virtue ethics. And how, if we understand, for example, Aristotle, he talks about virtue is actually a balance between two extremes. Let me give you one example.
Sure.
A good, virtuous person would be balanced between cowardice and recklessness. You don't want to be a coward, but you don't want to get to the point where you're totally reckless and jumping into everything without any reserve for the dignity of yourself, your responsibilities, and maybe the circumstances of other people in a situation. A good balance would be courage. That doesn't mean that you don't have fear. not moving to the point of being
Sure.
a coward, but that doesn't mean that you're not considering other things. And I think that this balance in terms of virtue really enters in when we're dealing with friends and family who experience same-sex attraction.
And it can enter in how we stand up for them to
Yes.
people. We as Catholics should be advocating on behalf of their dignity as persons. So we should be examples of standing up for the dignity and the well-treatment of people who identify as part of the LGBT community. But that does not mean enshrining extra or certain rights in the civil law that would negate the traditional family structure. I'm not talking about at a political level. I'm talking about even in your own circle, in your own life. Start small. Don't just think big picture, oh, the government's got to do this or that. In your life, can you stand up for the dignity of somebody who's being maligned for their struggle or their even identification as a member of the LGBT community?
Absolutely. I want to talk about this from a practical perspective for people who are maybe have a son, a daughter, an immediate family member. You're listening to Trending with Timmery. Michael Gaspar is a marriage and family therapist. He works a lot with sex addiction, trauma, and so much more in your practice. But here's the challenge is I think addressing a behavior versus condemning a person. And with that requires love. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Absolutely. So many people come to me from other parts of the world. They're part of either the Islamic faith traditions or they're Muslim men. I have Christian men, Catholic men, men who are not religious at all, who many of them experience romantic same-sex attractions or sexual feelings towards other men. And they don't want to live a lifestyle that is in conflict with their values. And every world religion, every major world religion tends to have this similar worldview about ordered sexuality and marriage. So when I'm with these people who deal with this and I'm looking them in the eye directly and talking with them and seeing their pain and their hurt, I am not going to overgeneralize them as a person that is solely that thing they're struggling with. Many of them have other struggles as well. Binge eating disorder, pornography addiction, or a whole list of other psychological conditions. I would not take any of those other things and slap a label on them and say, you are this thing. I would treat them with dignity and kindness regardless of their struggle. I work at an outpatient psychiatric hospital where I work regularly every week with people with paranoid schizophrenia. Do you think that it's healthy to put a label on them as you are a paranoid schizophrenic and that is the totality of your identity? No, we wouldn't do that. One of the challenges here, though, is the American Psychological and Psychiatric Associations have removed from our discussion the ability to talk about anything regarding same-sex attraction as a mental health issue. And so then we as Catholics become maligned for addressing this as anything other than you were just born that way. So you're absolutely right. We have to look at the person and not just the behavior. And